should have got that notice about the recording, so we are official. And I'm just going to turn off my video just in case there's any bandwidth issues. Sometimes it will lag. So at any point, Sarah, especially if you could let me know if it's cutting out or if there's any issues, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Will do.
All right. Thank you. All right. So today's agenda, we're going to do a brief introduction. We're going to go over the NextGen Ag Leadership Program. We'll talk about the application process and how to apply. We'll briefly talk about the review process just so you can know what to expect. And then we'll share resources, mostly from the website. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, also with some contact information if you want to reach out to us later. But if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand during the conversation or add a message in the chat and we'll get to them. But if you can hold off till the end, we will have time for Q&A at that point. All right, so officially welcome. Again, this is for the Colorado Department of Agriculture's NextGen Ag Leadership Grant Program. And this is a relatively new grant program here at the state. I manage the program. I'll be the grant program manager. You could reach out if you have any questions. And our grant specialist for this program is Sarah Miller. And here's our contact email should you want to reach us. And again, we'll share these slides and additional information. So you make sure that you have our email information. Yeah, so this is probably the quickest way to reach us. All right, so we'll just quickly dive in to some high-level details about the program, and then I'll share with you those resources and just kind of walk through some different ways that you can go through the application process and some resources to help you. So for those who are not familiar, this is going to be the Ag Leadership Program for 2024, but will actually be covered in 2025 fiscal year. So the projects are generally going to run starting from July 1st through June 30th of 2025. So your project wouldn't have to run that whole period, just within that year period. And we'll talk a little bit more about scholarships, but if you do have a scholarship program, you do have a little bit of extra time and we'll go into those details. So just high level that the NextGen Ag Leadership Grant Program provides grants to agricultural organizations and educational institutions that support developmental and training opportunities for the next generation of agriculturalists. Another thing I'd like to point out is that programs that would qualify for the grants are generally going to be those that are impacting the next generation and helping lead them into careers in food and agriculture and to prepare them to be the leaders of tomorrow for Colorado agriculture. And then again, as I mentioned, a lot of this details on the website. You have our contact information, so feel free to reach out at any point if you have any questions along the way. So this $120,000 in total funding available is what we're anticipating, but we are expecting a little bit of extra funding. So we're going to start off by initially awarding around $120,000, and as additional funds come in, we'll award more as that funding becomes available. And so for this project, or for this program, excuse me, the grants can be up to $25,000. You don't have to request the full $25,000. You can do any range for your program that will be under that $25,000 threshold. So anywhere in between or up to that max, you'll be okay. And just a reminder for those who have not participated in this grant program or who might not be familiar, this is a reimbursement grant program. That generally means you would spend the funding, you would spend for your expenses based on what your application and what we work up with the contracting, and you would provide us what you spent and we would reimburse you for that. We do have instances if you needed the money advanced and we would work out that deal with you. So if you do have a good program and you're selected and you need an advance payment, we can talk about those options. And it's also in the grant application. So if it's something that you did need consideration, you'll have an opportunity to call that out on your application to flag it for us to be aware of that. And so if there's any questions about the reimbursement grant process, we can ask, or we can hold some questions off at the end. In case you do have those questions, but if you're familiar with the program, it's generally how it's been run in the past. Okay, one second here. All right. So we have a few priorities for the program that we're looking for. The biggest one is going to be NextGen impact. So we're really looking for leadership programs, training programs, developmental programs that are really going to shape the next generation. And that can look a few different ways. So the first priority, that's going to be developing individual leadership and or entrepreneurial skills. One example might include established leadership and training programs. And I believe we have some of our past recipients on this call. If they'd like to share some of their experience at the end, that would be greatly appreciated, because we do see some of these projects that really do a good job at really targeting the next gen and really providing them with some foundational knowledge to help them get going. And so this one would be priority 1. And then priority 2 is going to be enhancing organizational leadership and capacity building. An example of this one might include agricultural organizations seeking to develop leaders internally. We've received those looking to help develop their board, their managers, and really help shape those next leaders in agriculture within your own organization. So that would be priority number 2. Priority number 3 is going to be creating educational and or training opportunities. So with this one, we have a few examples that might help you see if this is a good fit. So if your priority that you're focusing on for your project is number 3, examples might include foundations providing next-gen educational and or training, conferences wanting to offer scholarships, community colleges and or educational entities offering financial assistance for youth pursuing education in food or agricultural programs. And it doesn't necessarily have to be youth. It could be anybody who's considered a next-gen farmer. So anybody who's been farming within under 10 years would be considered next-gen. So don't let youth, that word should be taken out. So it's really just next generation beginning farmers. All right, and so those are the 3 priorities. And as I mentioned, this stuff's on the website. So as you're working through your details for your application, if you wanted a quick reference, we'll send you these slides. But as I mentioned, the website's a good reference, and we'll kind of walk through a little bit of that as well. So right now, we'll just kind of briefly touch the application process, and I'll just kind of show navigation on where to find some of these things. So first, we'll just cover briefly who can apply, and that's basically any agricultural organizations. It could be for profit, nonprofit. It just has to benefit more than, it could be any agricultural organizations. We'll leave it at that. And it can be for profit or for nonprofit. It can also be educational institutions or other educational entities serving the next generation. So if you're an institution and you're not sure, or if you're an organization, as long as you're in agriculture, you'll be fine to apply. And our application period, you have until May 2nd by 5 p.m. We do ask that you get those into us by 5. If you have any questions, we do ask that you get to them, if you can ask us sooner rather than later, just so we can make sure we get your answers in enough time for you to be able to submit your application confidently. So just a little bit of lead time, just to give us enough time to answer, would be greatly appreciated, but we're here to help and offer any kind of technical support along the way. And as I mentioned, I just kind of wanted to show the web page and the application and what that looks like. So give me a quick moment here and I'll share a new screen. One second. Okay. And Sarah, can you give me a thumbs up? Are we able to see the website? Or can you unmute yes. And just give me a, yes. You can see it? Yes, okay, perfect, thank you. All right. Sorry, folks, some technical issues here, jumping back and forth. Thanks for your patience with this. So as I mentioned, the website's going to be a really good resource, and that's ag.colorado.gov/markets. And if you basically come to our CDA webpage and come to markets here, markets funding, it's this one here, NextGen Ag Leadership. And basically that will launch you here to our webpage. And just some more details about the program. And here's where I mentioned those priorities being here to this left column. And so if you're really trying to work and develop, where your priorities are going to be for your project, here's where you can reference, which might be a best fit for your focus. And there's a couple places where you can apply. So one is just this big green box. If you click on it, it's going to reroute you to a Google form. And that Google form is what you'll complete for the application. Now, it won't let you advance sections. So if you're wanting to take a look at the whole application prior to getting it started, I'll show you where to find that PDF so that you can look through the questions if you'd like to see all of them in advance before actually getting it started. So we'll walk through that a little bit too. And so this green box, as I mentioned, click here for the application, and you can also click here and it will do the same thing. And as I mentioned, down here is a PDF version. So if you click on this, it's going to launch right to the application. And Sarah, can you just give me a yes? Can you see the application now?
Yes, we can see the application.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, so this PDF version is a little bit clunky. Unfortunately, when we save it, it's really limited to how we can edit it. So please don't mind some of the extra spaces. It's just really the text that's important. So this is basically the PDF version of the application. Basically some of the same information that we're discussing here and the same information from the website. So feel free to read it when you have the application. If you'd like to read it completely, I highly recommend. And just a reminder of our contact information. So if you need to reach us at any point, this is a great way to contact us via email. All right, so basically, it's going to just ask general information. If you've applied in the past, it's going to be pretty much the same. There's two areas that I really wanted to talk about, and then we can talk about it a little more at the end if you have any questions. But here's the area where you would select one of the priorities. So you want to make sure you're selecting one of those. And we really want to make sure we're impacting the next gen. So we want to make sure that your applications are conveying the narrative you want us to see. So just make sure you're providing details where we could see your vision, so that way we're able to have our review team score and make sure we're not missing anything. So the more detail you can provide, the better. One area we're going to look to incorporate that past recipients may have not remembered for this specific program, and that's actually doing some surveys throughout the grant period, just to find out more about the NextGen impact and to learn more and to get real-time or more up-to-date reporting and updates on your projects rather than waiting till the end. So that way we can kind of keep a pulse on how things are going and see if there's anything we need to shift or change. So one of the questions that we ask, and I'm looking for it here, it mentions surveys. So if you're going to conduct surveys and you're going to relay that data back to us, what we're really looking for is, what does that survey schedule look like? Like, what kind of questions are you going to be engaging, and how often, and how will it be reported? So we don't know, we don't have to know like what software or super intense details, just that you have a plan to collect the data, and then if we have certain questions we're looking to get answers for, if you could plug those in. So we're really looking just for what that story looks like for surveys. So if you will be conducting surveys or any kind of touch points with your NextGen apprentices or folks that you bring in, you'll just want to let us know how you'll be keeping track of that. So the best way you can do that, the better for us to understand. That would be greatly appreciated. And then the timeline as well. So any details that you have, any events, any details surrounding your project in general, just provide that outline. And if you can do it just in order from, you know, most recent to your most endpoint, and just kind of give us an idea of what that looks like. And if it's like just a single event, how many people you're anticipating, and just some general information that will help us understand what the impact would look like for your project. And similar with the budget, we're asking a couple questions. One is the total amount, and then asking for a little bit more detail about the expenses. So if you're going to do stipends, or if you're going to do any kind of scholarships, just what that would look like. For instance, X amount of, we'll say, apprentices times 5 stipends times $1,000 a stipend. Just give us the details to break out who's receiving it, when they're receiving it, how much and how often, and what they're going to be attending to get that. So any kind of detail you can provide us on the budget is going to help us understand the project a little bit better. So feel free to get as detailed as needed. If there's any instances where we come across something where we're not sure or it's not allowed in the budget, we may reach out and say, we can do this project, but can we adjust the budget accordingly? So there may be potential, but it's better to include enough information so that way if we do reduce or we make those adjustments, it's better to have it than to not have it. So as much information as you could provide would be great for us to understand all the expenses and what you're going to be spending for the project. And so this is that template. You can find it on the website, and it's just basically showing you all the questions in advance, what you need. And as I mentioned, the advance payment. So if you needed the money in advance, you would just check yes, and then you would just let us know the percent. And then if your project's selected, we'll work with you on those details. So just let us know on your application, and we'll move accordingly if you're selected. All right, so that's about it for the PDF. I'm just going to stop sharing that really quickly. All right, so we'll pop back over here to the application process page we have here. And just again, just get your applications by May 2nd at 5 p.m. And any questions, just reach out to Sarah or I ahead of time, and we'll do our best to schedule something with you to make sure that you've got everything you need to get your application submitted. We do anticipate sending notices to applications the week of June 3rd. That gives us enough time, just in case we get a lot of applications, for a review committee to review those, and then also have a chance for the Ag Commissioner to review. So it does take a little bit of time. So we are anticipating notices out by June 3rd. If for some reason there's a delay, we will be sure to notify you via email. So whatever email you provide on your application, just make sure that's the best email for us to contact you, because that's where we're going to send notifications moving forward after your application is received. And then just a little bit more detail on the review period. It is a cross-divisional CDA review committee. So we'll try to get as many folks on board here from different departments at CDA. And myself or Sarah, we do not review the applications. We just facilitate the process. So we'll help the reviewers take a look at your applications, and we'll provide them everything they need to be able to review your application successfully. All right. And all right. So as I mentioned, the review process, a little more details about some of the criteria. So those three strategic areas we mentioned with the priorities, that's one thing that's going to be looked at. So a degree to which the project focuses on educational, training, and or leadership development opportunities for next-gen agriculturalists. So that's one area that's going to be looked at. The expected impact of the proposal, including the number of next-gen agriculturalists supported, and showing that the funds will serve next-gen agriculturalists who otherwise wouldn't have the resources to access opportunity, et cetera. So we want to make sure we're providing access and opportunity to those who may have not had such otherwise. And newer innovative initiatives will receive special consideration. So please, be encouraged to submit those. And matching is not required, but will receive special consideration. It's not the end-all, area that we're focusing on. But if there is matching funds, be sure to identify that and call that out on the application, because it will be considered. I'll highlight that. All right, and so again, the web page is going to basically have everything we talked about. It's going to have the resources. And it's also going to have some frequently asked questions, documents that can be found at the bottom. So the web page is going to be the best area to find resources, other than contacting Sarah and I, and then we can be able to guide you, especially if you have any technical support, if you're having any issues with the form, or running into any trouble at all. Just let us know, and we'll help you get through it so we can make sure your application's in on time. All right, so that was just a very high-level overview of the program. So I see we have a couple of questions. I'll leave this slide up for a little bit if you want to take note of our email addresses. Again, you don't have to. We're going to send some follow-up, and I'll make sure that you have our contact information as well. So we'll leave that up just for a couple more minutes, and I'll just go ahead and start. Are there any questions?
We do have a couple of questions in the chat, Joanne. Did you want to start there?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, the first question is from Danny. And the question is, by advance, do you mean if we need it before July 1st?
If you need it, yeah, well, it would actually be July 1st or after, but stay within roughly the 2 weeks or a month in July, because what would happen is we'd have to go through a process and that can take a little bit. So if you need the funds before you can spend, then you would get an advance. Did that answer,
Great.
Danny?
Sorry, yes, I wasn't clear on that. Even if we're doing our project in September, for example, but we need the funds before we can start the project, is that what you mean by advance then?
Exactly. Otherwise, it's a traditional reimbursement grant, so you have to spend the funds, show us the expenses, and then we would reimburse you for what you spent. But if we advance you the funds, we give you the funds ahead of time, and then after you've spent it down, you just send us the expenses showing what you spent it on. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
The next question is
I
from
think Jeff has a.
Okay. Are these priorities ranked in order of preference, or are they all considered equally?
Equally. They're all equally.
Great. Okay, the next question is, who is qualified as next generation leader in agriculture?
Great question. So that would be any next generation agriculturalist. So anybody who's under 10 years in agriculture, anybody training for leadership internally in an organization, in training courses. So yeah, as long as it's under 10 years and you're new to NextGen.
The next question is, are there any specific non-allowable expenses for the budget? Also, will partial
let's see, partial.
Also, will partial awards be offered? For example, if 10,000 is requested, would there be a scenario where the funding is awarded but only 5,000?
Great question. Yes, yes. So that's why it's better to identify everything you're planning to expend. There's some things that are not allowed, like if you're a nonprofit, you wouldn't be able to claim taxes. There's some, like, certain expenses you can't get reimbursed, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But I did want to touch on the part where the partial awards. So yes, that can occur. So if we're reading your grant application and our reviewers give it a really high score, they just have questions about the budget or question some of the stuff, we may come back to you and say, hey, can you do it without this? Or this isn't allowed, can we make some adjustments? So that is a very likely possibility.
All right, thanks, Drew. And I think that's all of the questions that have come through in the chat so far.
All right. Do we have anybody, any past grantees for ag leadership that would like to talk about their experience or share with everybody just kind of how the grant program may have impacted their NextGen? No takers? No worries at all. All right. Well, if there's no questions, I didn't want to rush things. If there's no questions, we can hold on and stay a little bit longer if anybody wants to stay on and stick around. But for those who don't, reach out anytime. We're happy to help you. The website's a really good resource. And if there's anything we can guide you with this grant project or this grant process applications, just reach out. We're happy to help you.
All right, there's one more question that's come in from Sheila. Can we talk about the difference between priority 1 and 2? Specifically, who would be the target audience for number 1 if non-internal teammates, if not internal teammates, excuse me.
If not internal, so we've seen, so like in this case, whether it's expanding, like I mentioned, let's see, I'm trying to think of one offhand that was like a really successful project. This only started in 22, so it's kind of, it's not really shifted from where it began. It's just been pretty broad. So it's more so, I'm just trying to
I would say one example perhaps, like from last year, there was one program that it was a permaculture program, and it involved hiring a lady who had multiple years experience, and she did consultation for the organization for their internal leaders. There was about 10 of them, and she did She did a monthly meeting and then, or 2 monthly meetings, and then she did one-on-ones with the individual leaders in the program as well. And then aside from that, the organization also held a conference. So frequently in these programs, they're connecting the impacts. It isn't just developing leadership, they're extending that then to also include educational opportunities that impact the community as well. So that is one thing that we see, is that it's not just one program priorities. Some projects are hitting multiple priorities.
Yeah, and the question, how, like, if you include more than one, that is considered, but if you only included one, just because you included all three doesn't necessarily outrank it. So they're all equal, but like Sarah mentioned, they can overlap, and that's also looked at, but you don't have to have all three or meet all three to have your projects qualified. And then number 2, I think they mentioned 2, was it? Enhancing organizational leadership capacity building. And so I think that one, like we've seen applications for the board, like internal board members, or creating a new role for a program manager who's gonna lead internally the organization, and they're just newer to the roles and they're being developed. So it's those developmental programs internally. And
I guess
so,
maybe the example I gave probably relates to number 2 a little bit more, where they were enhancing their internal organizational leadership, perhaps.
And we see kind of both. It could be internal, but we have organizations, and I'll say, like, let's see, we'll say like Guidestone. They're a really great program, and so they do trainings that aren't necessarily internal, but it's training for the organization, but they're not necessarily an educational institution, so they're more of a nonprofit. So that would be a really good fit as to past programs or past organizations that have participated. Yeah.
There's two other questions that have come in. The first one is, will there be a focus on quantity over quality? For example, impacting 100 NextGen leaders versus 10 Next leaders with a deeper experience?
I mean, we definitely want to have a big impact. So we are going to be interested in the number, but that's not going to be the determining factor. We really want to show that whether it's 1 or 100, that impact of the project is going to, help that person or those people really get a good foundation in agriculture to help them continue in agriculture and then grow and develop from there. So yeah, we're looking at those numbers, but you're not going to be knocked down if it shows a really good opportunity with just one person. So yeah.
Right, the quality over quantity. For another example, there's a farm that was awarded this past year, and their impact was on 3 NextGen leaders, because their goal was to offer full-time employment to their farm workers who frequently never come back the next season, versus a school who had hundreds of students. And so it's not necessarily quantity over quality. And the next question is, you mentioned matching funds, but I'm curious to hear how you would consider requests that might be for a smaller percentage, 20% of a large project, versus the proposal to fund 50 to 100% of a smaller project. Okay, so
I don't think that's going to be considered as much as impact. We're really looking for those projects and those programs that are going to really create a lasting impact on these NextGen leaders. So yeah, I don't think that would be taken into consideration as much as the quality of the opportunity.
Right. I think last year we had both of those instances where there was one organization funded 100% and others that were funded in that 20% range, and the size of the project wasn't a consideration. Yeah. And then another question is, can we select multiple priorities for our application?
I think it's just a one select, but if you happen to select more and it doesn't let you select multiples, just make a note in there and I'll go try to adjust the form to allow it to do multiples. Yes. But if for some reason you're going in to do that and it's not letting you, that must mean that it didn't let me make that option. So if you do plan to hit other areas, just make sure to put that out in your project description that you'll be targeting more than one area. And then as long as it's noted somewhere, we'll be able to find it.
All right, that's everything that's come in the chat so far.
All right. I think I see Candace on the line. I don't want to call you out, Candace, but would you want to share a little bit about your project?
I can share a little bit, but I'm not the one who really heads that project up, but
Okay.
it's been very helpful. I am from the STED school, and our school is an agriculturally focused high school. All of our students are taking an agricultural pathway as they go through high school in addition to their high school requirements. And so the grant that we received for our program helped supply our team and the students with much needed materials they needed to pursue their agricultural pathways of study for them to move on into their post-secondary plans and participate in agricultural, hopefully.
Thanks. Thank you. Didn't mean to call you out like that, but appreciate you sharing.
That's okay.
Yeah, we're excited about your about the STEM school. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes, absolutely. We're excited to partner.
Great. Any other questions? All right. Well, I guess we'll let everybody go. So, Sarah, if you can stop the recording, that'll be excellent. And we'll send a follow-up to everybody that registered. It can take a little while to get the link. We have to convert this file to a YouTube file, and that gets done in another department. So sometimes it could take a while. So we'll send a quick follow-up email after this, just so you have our contact information should you need to reach us. And as I mentioned, any technical issues, any questions that come up, just reach out at any point. We're more than happy to help you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Candace.
I'm not oh, here we go. Let me see. I'm not sure I'm able to stop recording on my end. I'm clicking.